Hello friends, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. Well, I'm here today to try to consolidate all the various vacuum sealing methods into one video to make it easier. I know I have a lot of videos on vacuum sealing, but there's always new ideas and things coming out of what you can use. And I know there's even more than what I'm going to talk about. I'm just going to show you what I have and what I have used in the past. So when I first got started in vacuum sealing into jars, I was using my foodsaver. Now I've had like 4 or 5 different foodSavers, and now none of them work. One by one, they went in the garbage. And I keep thinking I had thrown this one out, but alas, I still have it. And I remember why I keep saving it is so that I can at least show it in videos, even though I can't really demonstrate with it because it doesn't work anymore. So this was the first way I did it. And then using the foodsaver tops, which, you know, these have been great. I've had the same set for I don't know how many years. Well, at least for as long as I've been vacuum sealing into jars. What you do when you're using a foodsaver or any other such sealing type machine like this, a lot of them are going to have an accessory port like you can see right here. On this particular foodsaver, it's marked in green, which I don't know if they're still like that. This is an older model. Typically what that means is that the green end goes into that and then the gray end goes into your accessory, whatever it is. So you'll see this is spliced together. I'll talk about that in a minute. The accessory port on this doesn't even work anymore anyway. But anyway, that should snap into place. And then this end would plug into any of your vacuum sealing type tops. This is an off-brand one. The thing I don't like about these is it doesn't have the handle, but they do make an off-brand one now that has a handle, which I'll link to that set down below. And then you still got to make sure that, at least with this one, again, it could be different depending on the type of foodsaver you have, the brand, but you still got to lock that down into place even though you're not using the bag option here. And then you'll hit your green button here to get started. And when it stops, your jar should be sealed at that point. One of the issues I always had, even with the foodsaver and the foodsaver top and the regular mouth, is that I had a lot of issues getting it to seal. It seems like most of the time I just could not get it to seal. And I would try heating the lids. Sometimes that would work, but a lot of times it still wouldn't. And it could be this particular model just didn't have enough pull to work with the design of the foodsaver top in the regular mouth. It's designed slightly different than the wide mouth one. You might not be able to see offhand, but when I hold it this way, you should be able to see a distinct difference. This silicone gasket here actually comes out farther, and it's just made different than this one. And then this one pops out all the time. So I think that is half the issue right there. But what I found out is when I switched to the brake bleeder method, it's been about 6.5 years now, I started using a brake bleeder pump instead. With the foodsaver tops, I stopped having problems with it sealing. I still had problems with the inner part, this little silicone thing popping out when I'd go to lift it off my jar, but that's not that big a deal. You just pop it back in. You just want to make sure that the open part here is facing out, not in, okay? Because if you have it facing the wrong way, it's just not going to work at all. So that's the foodsaver. But this one here, I want you to see this. This is the off-brand cheap set. I bought the whole set for under $20, and it comes with a vacuum pump. I'll show you in a minute. But you can see it's got that similar where the gasket actually comes all the way out. This one does work better. These type of tops, no matter what brand you buy, are made to fit specifically to canning jars. So you're either going to have a wide mouth or a regular mouth, depending on which jar you're sealing in. This right here, I've got peanut butter powder sealed up in a regular mouth jar. This is actually a recycled mayonnaise jar back from when they used to make them glass. And there's something gray in there. I'll explain that in a little bit. But at any rate, you're going to just slide that top down over with the lid in place, but not the band. It's important that you don't put the band on. You won't be able to get this on here if the band is in place. So this is one case that you have to keep the band off while you're vacuum sealing. Then you can take your brake bleeder pump. The way I do it is using this tip, Some people will modify theirs and take like the foodsaver and cut the end off, one end off, and then jam that up inside the hose. Then you don't have to hold this tip in place. And there's other options you can do too. Holding that tip in place, rest the brake bleeder pump against the counter, and then use my whole arm, even all the way up to my shoulder, to pump down on the pump itself instead of trying to do it all with the work of just my hands. Especially if you have arthritis, that can be very, very difficult. And then I just pump until the needle stops moving. But usually once it gets totally vertical, usually by then it's sealed, but I like to go farther than that. And there we go. And that jar, I do know it's sealed because I actually heard it tink. You won't always, but sometimes you will. Now, one thing about these off-brand ones is they're a little harder to pull off. So as I said earlier, I'll link you to the off-brand set that has handles like this. Yeah, that makes it so much easier to come off of there. So anyway, and then I always test my jars by picking them up by the lid just an inch or two off the counter. And then that way I know that it's sealed. At that point, yes, I put the bands on. You do not have to put the bands on. Remember, this isn't pressure can, water bath can stuff. So the whole band on the jar thing does not apply to this. This is vacuum sealed dried goods. So anyway, I put the band on snugly. Now, the reason I put the band on is sometimes you can still lose a seal no matter how good you did it. Certain things, there could have been something lodged under the lid that you missed, whatever, can cause your things to go unsealed in storage. And so you want to keep that band on for several reasons. That's going to help at least keep it fresher, even though if it does come in sealed. But it's also going to help too if you go to grab that and you assume it's still vacuum sealed and you don't have that band in place, and your ingredients could go flying all over the place. And then not only did you waste all the ingredients, now you have a big old mess to clean up. So I always put the bands on my vacuum sealed goods no matter what they are. So I'm going to open this one again so I can demonstrate on another product. This time I'll use the foodsaver top. But I'm going to use this little pump that came with this off-brand set. It's just a cheap little pump that looks kind of like a bicycle pump. The only difference is with the bicycle pump, you're pumping air in, so the air is getting pushed out. In this case, you're pulling the air out, so all the action is going to happen as you're pulling up. So in this case, what I do, and again, it works with this, it works with the one it came with, is you'll see a little silicone piece there, right there. Just place that firmly over the hole on the top, the jar sealing top, and then you're just going to start pumping. And you keep pumping, it'll start getting tighter and tighter. You don't have a gauge to go by other than the way it feels. Sometimes you'll hear a tink, sometimes you won't, but you just keep pumping until you cannot pump it anymore. There we go. Picking it up by the lid, not very far, not over the floor in case the lid comes off and it falls. Now, when you're first getting started, the least expensive way to go to vacuum seal is to go with one of these off-brand sets, because typically for $20 or less, you can get the pump and your regular mouth sealer and your wide mouth sealer, and then usually some other things like maybe a few lids, a hose that might be totally unusable. The one I have came with a hose like this, similar to this, that would fit to a foodsaver machine. Anyway, this is the cheapest way to get started, the least expensive way. For under 20 bucks, you've got all you need to vacuum seal your jars, as long as they are all mason jars, or at least have mason jar size mouths to them, like this old mayonnaise jar does. This is a regular mouth right here. This is why a lot of people used recycled mayonnaise jars for canning, because they could use canning lids with them. So yes, in that case, cheapest way to get started. Then the next step up would be to go with the brake bleeder pump, which I do actually prefer. I am finding over time this is not working quite as good as it was when I first got it. So I'm still sold on the brake bleeder pump. So in that case, you're going to be talking about another $20 to $25 for a brake bleeder pump. Now this can be, it usually comes in a full kit. You can find them on Amazon. I'll link to one below. You can find them in an automotive store because remember, brake bleeder pump is for automotive. So you're not going to find it in the food preservation part of your store. It's going to be in the automotive. And some people say you can also find them at Harbor Freight. Well, so the next thing then is, let's say you've got lug style lid jars like this, where your mason jar sealing tops won't fit. Either they're too small or too big, too loose, that they're not going to pull the air out. Well, in that case, just like I did with this walnut jar, and in that case, when I'm doing a jar like this, I then will pull out the chamber that Patrick made me, and he is still selling these, and he makes two different sizes, and I will do my sealing in this. So this old green olive jar, I just slip it down in here. I'm not going to open it and reseal it, but I just want to show you basically how it works. Try not to drop it down there because you might crack it. Put your lid in place. You want to tighten down that wing nut so that you should be able to pick up the chamber by the wing nut. That's how tight it should be. And then you can take, as you can see here, I have the hose to the brake bleeder pump put on directly on this port down here. And then same thing, I'm gonna pump up my brake bleeder, and it does take a little bit longer because there's more air to pull out because you're pulling the air out of the jar as well as out of the chamber. And then once you get up to at least that same point and your needle stops moving, then you should be able to pull your jar out and find that it's sealed. Now I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate on the stinging nettle jar again so you can see how this works. Now in this case, when you're using a mason jar, you're going to put your band on, but you're only going to put it on loosely like that. Don't tighten it down. If you tighten it down too tight, you cannot pull, it will not pull the air out of the jar. So as you've seen how I did that, I only turn the band, not holding it with my other hand, until the jar starts moving, just like you would if you were using a Tatler lid. And then again, carefully putting that down into the chamber, putting my lid in place, tightening that down. And then I think if I remember correctly, it takes about 30 seconds of pumping for it to fully seal the jar. And this is a quart jar. You can put smaller jars in the chamber, and even if the jars are small enough, you can even stack 2 jars inside the chamber. And it should seal them both at the same time. And the same would apply to the half-gallon chamber back here. You could stack jars in there. As long as the jar fits inside the chamber, it shouldn't be a problem. So that's why we have the 2 different sizes. Now me, I don't have a half-gallon one for myself, because if I'm going to seal half-gallon jars, I'm going to use one of these instead. And there we go. It's sealed, and then I put the band back in place before I put it back in storage. So again, same thing applies with the half-gallon chamber. If you're using, though, a brake bleeder pump with this, it's going to take quite a while, especially if you're only putting smaller jars in here and not using at least a half-gallon jar. Now, the reason he makes them this tall is so that if you get those big pickle jars from Costco, those will actually fit in here. And anyway, the same idea, you put this down in there, you vacuum seal it. The brake bleeder pump, though, will take a lot longer in this case. You can do it, but your arms are probably going to get really tired. So if you're going with a half-gallon chamber to do half-gallon jars, I recommend having some kind of electric pump of some sort. I don't know for sure, because I haven't been able to use it, if a foodsaver machine like this would be strong enough to pull that much out. It should, and hopefully if there's anyone that's been using one, they can tell me how that works. But there's other types of pumps that you can get, vacuum pumps. Now, some people have shared that they've been able to get one electric pump for around $100 or so at Harbor Freight that works pretty good for vacuum sealing all kinds of things. Now, one thing to note about the chambers is that this port right here, this is the most common one that we sell. It is about 1/4 inch. I call it 10 millimeter, which it's really not, because that's not the actual size of the port. That's just what I call it. But it's actually about 1/4 inch, and it's the one that will fit directly to the brake bleeder pump hose. But it is too wide for your food saver hose like this. So in that case, what you can do is, even though we do offer another size, with the smaller port, which is the 1/8 inch, which I refer to as a 6 millimeter, you can get that smaller port in at least this one. And then the hose from your food saver, if you still have to cut off one end, will fit directly over that port. And then you can just use your food saver on your chamber. And then the other option is you simply have a 4-inch piece of hose like this that you can shove the food saver hose into, and then that will fit over your port this way. And then at that point, you can plug this end into the food saver and try it that way. So that's some options. And it doesn't matter if it's this one or this one. And if you're concerned about cutting the hose in half or cutting the end off of it, and you want to be able to use it like this, well, with that same short piece, you just patch it back together like that. And so now I can use the hose like this, and it does work. There's another option that you can use if you don't like the pump idea at all, whether it be this little cheap guy here or using the brake bleeder pump, but you don't want to invest in a full machine like that, is getting this little rechargeable food saver thing here. So let me try it on this same jar again. And in this case, what you do is you take that off. See that? And there's a little port that sticks up. And I'll link to this down below. And again, I don't use this. Again, I bought it just so I could try it out, because I seen Mary from Mary's Nest had this, and I thought I would just, out of curiosity, see how well it worked. And then you stick that little end down into your food saver top or your other type of top, and then you just hold that button down until it seals. If you listen, you can usually get a pretty good idea of when it's done, because it will start to kind of get lower and lower and lower. And you might actually hear the jar, the lid to the jar, make that seal sound. You hear that? I heard it pop. So I'm going to let it go just for a few more seconds to make sure. Okay. And you pull your top off, and there you go. So for those who don't want to have to pump, but don't want to invest in a full machine, then this might be the better option. I think I paid around $40 for this. I don't remember how much it costs. But again, it is rechargeable, so it has its own little charging port here. Huh, that works too. Okay, so I just tried this with this little cap in place. It's got the silicone here, just like with this. So instead of using that port, this was actually just a little bit easier. You just got to pull it off there. And I heard the lid seal, and I use the off-brand set for that. And look at that. So there's a couple different ways that'll work with that. Now, a couple more tips I want to talk about in regards to vacuum sealing. So as I mentioned earlier, in this peanut butter powder, you can see some gray in there, or in this cheese powder. I don't know if you can see it, but right in there. What you're seeing there is a fabric. So whenever you're sealing any kind of powder, anything that's powdered, it doesn't matter what it is, doesn't matter what type of vacuum sealing method you're using, you want to make sure you have a piece of fabric or a muffin tin liner or a coffee filter or even a chunk of clean paper towel, and stick that over the top of the powder to create a barrier. If you don't have that barrier, what's going to happen is when you go to vacuum, remember you're pulling the air out of the jar, it's going to pull the powdery substance out under the lid, and it's going to create a coating on top of the rim of the jar, which is then going to prevent it from sealing at all, or if it does seal, it's not going to hold for long. So putting some kind of barrier over the top is important in this case. Another question I get quite often in regards to vacuum sealing is, do I use desiccant packs or O2 absorbers, oxygen absorbers. No, absolutely not. I never do. I never have. I never will. Because in my personal opinion, there's absolutely no need. Now, some people do prefer to go ahead and add an oxygen absorber because they're concerned that the vacuum does not pull out all of the oxygen. And so they'll go ahead and put an oxygen absorber in there too. I personally, in the many years I've been doing this, have seen absolutely no need for an oxygen absorber if you're going to vacuum seal anyway. I've had no issues. And yes, I vacuum seal nuts of all varieties like I have here. I have walnuts, I have pistachios, I have Brazil nuts, almonds, cashews, all kinds of different nuts vacuum sealed into jars, both jars like this that I've recycled and regular canning jars without any issue at all. No going rancid. The only thing that's ever gone rancid were jars that were left open and then forgotten about, such as peanut butter powder and some Brazil nuts that I had. The vacuum sealing process actually prevents these foods from going rancid, and again, no need for oxygen absorbers or desiccant packs. I have all kinds of videos about vacuum sealing different types of dried foods into jars that include cereal, crackers, and yes, they will last for years and years in food storage without going stale and without going rancid if you have them well sealed and they don't come unsealed. So here's another tip I want to throw out again too, is that whenever you vacuum seal, just like whenever you can, I recommend keeping your jars out for a couple of days and then checking them before you put them back in storage, because chances are if they're going to come unsealed because maybe you didn't pump it up tight enough or something got lodged under there, it's going to happen within the first couple of days. So anyway, hopefully I've covered all of my methods here so that I can just have one video to shoot out to you, but I will still give you the link to how to use the vacuum chamber for more information. Or if you email me and you're interested in purchasing one, that I will send out the information on the vacuum chamber, which also includes a link to the how-to video, which covers all kinds of tips to keep in mind when you're going to use the chamber. And then anyone who has any other suggestions, like I know some people have used pressure canners for vacuum sealing, like larger jars where they could put several in there at a time, and then using an electric pump and attaching that to the vent of their pressure canner. And that's another way. And if anyone has any ideas of some good electric pumps that aren't too expensive but will save people their hands and arms and whatever from having to do this method, and maybe the vacuum, they're concerned about the foodsaver or certain other sealing type machines not being strong enough, especially for using with the half-gallon chamber, then please give your suggestions down below. And I hope you found this video helpful. Thanks for watching. Take care and God bless.